Hey, what's going on, y'all? Today we're going to be going over the Kettlebell Windmill, which is a lift that includes a lot of subtle techniques. So we're just going to go through it step by step and address ways that you can get the most out of this wonderful exercise that promotes and requires lots of stability, mobility, flexibility, and strength. So this is an overhead lift. It's kind of an overhead static lift. So first of all, how you get the weight overhead matters. All right, so that's step number one. Some people will snatch it. You can push press it. Personally, I just like to make sure that I get in a really good, solid, clean, and press in order to get the weight up overhead. So if you're already familiar with strong, clean technique, that's half the battle. So, already I'm thinking engagement with the lat, tight legs and core. I got my hand just how I want it in the handle. I've got my grip tight, and from here, I'm gonna zip up and press. So already, I've taken the steps necessary to make sure that my starting position is as solid as it can be. Don't neglect this part, okay? So now that I'm up overhead, now we're going to get into the windmill position. So all I pretty much like to say is start from hip width and then maybe scooch out another inch or two. You can generally think about this as being your one-arm swing stance. All right? Now from here, we're going to turn the toes away from your loaded side. Approximately 45 degrees. They don't necessarily have to be totally perpendicular. You can have a little asymmetry in the angle here. Now I'm going to load and root through my kettlebell side. So what I like to do is actually pick up my front foot a couple times, tiptoe it, so that I know I'm biasing my weight on this side. This leg is going to stay a little bit bent. This side is going to stay straight. Ooh, look at me, I'm already losing my position. Stay tall until you're ready to hinge the hip diagonally back. Squeeze tight to come up. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate that one more time. And I'll usually readjust my feet in between reps. Pumping the leg here just to make sure that 80% of my weight is on this side. Squeeze tight. Bring it down. And that's the basic sequence of the windmill. So just a couple other small points to keep in mind. As you are hinging back, because this is a hip hinge, it's not a rounding or folding forward. As you come out with the hip and your torso tips and rotates, your shoulder angle here is going to go from closed to more open. When that happens, you have to absorb the kettlebell weight more with your lats. So you go from a very delt dominant, delt heavy position to a more lat dominant position. So you really gotta tighten that muscle, like you're pulling your armpit down to your hip. Okay? Obviously your delt and everything else is still working, but it's this unique interplay between the rotator cuff, the delt, and the lat in this dynamic back and forth fashion that you get in stuff like the windmill and the Turkish get-up that make these exercises so great. Okay? So, one last quick thing. Those of you who are familiar with heavy weightlifting might be familiar with the concepts of breathing and bracing to keep a stable torso, to keep good core engagement when you're squatting and deadlifting heavy weights. Well, we want to think about the same thing, especially in this case, when we're talking about the windmill. So I couldn't find a Pepsi or a Bud Light can here in the gym, but I did find a foam roller, which for our purposes is appropriate for this visual. So if you imagine that your torso is a can or a cylinder, right, that has a top, a bottom, and then a 360-degree encasement like we have here. When you are doing the windmill, you want to think about, this is your torso, it's a hinge, back, and rotation. There's no actual breakage, there's no bending going on here. So the cylinder is maintained, right? The torso position, the spinal position is maintained still in this head to tailbone manner. It is simply getting tipped and rotated. It is not actually flexing. Now, to be fair, there probably is a little bit of movement going on, but you want to keep that visual in mind as best you can. That's going to help you keep your core tight, that's going to help keep your spine safe, and that is going to put the work where it needs to be, which is in the hip, okay? So there's a lot going on with the windmill. It's detail-oriented, and it's not something to be glossed over. There's a lot of great benefit to working on the windmill, both with heavier and lighter weights. So keep some of these things in mind and enjoy.